beeps or buzzes or rattles or may otherwise distract you from what's going to be some wonderful music and some great stories. And I would also like to welcome everyone who's joining us online and to thank all the people who's making all of that possible. So to the people who created our slides, to the people who are offering our tech and camera services, to our greeters, to our collection gatherers, this whole crew up here who's worked for the last 4 weeks to prepare this service for you. It does take a village, and so thank you to that village. And we have a couple announcements from some members of our tribe. So I'll invite Jan up, actually I'll invite Pauline up first, and then Jan second.
Good morning, my name is Pauline Atwood, and I am one of the facilitators for the Soul Matters group. We are going to have a very short meeting in the large classroom, and it's going to look a little bit further into what your role is as a participant and also how to prepare for the first meeting. So I will look forward to seeing whoever is interested, whoever signed up, whoever might be interested and wants to know more information. I'll see you after the service in the large classroom.
Good morning. I'm Jan McMillan, and I'm one of the 3 endowment trustees in our congregation. And I would just like to ask you, when was the last time you updated your will? This is a little nudge for you to just think about it. And here's an opportunity. The Edmonton Community Foundation has many free seminars this coming week called Wills and Estates, and in your October newsletter, there's all the details about where you might like to attend and get some tips on how to update that will. Now, my next announcement is that we are planning a soup Sunday, October 15th. And so we need some soup makers and some people to help with setup and cleanup. And there's sign-ups in the foyer for those things, and we welcome having a soup Sunday finally after how long it's been. So sign up and come and enjoy soup after church on October 15th. Thank you.
Thank you, and we are going to begin our service today. Our service today is a nod to heritage, which is our theme for October. Happy October, by the way, new month today. And so we are going to cover 100 years of Universalist history, actually more than 100, in the next hour. So buckle up. We're going to start with a prelude.
To
So fulfilling the works of love, that pretty much sums up universalism. For our opening words, I would invite Robert Begg to come forward.
Good morning. Today we will talk briefly about a few of the founders of Universalism in North America, recount a few stories, and sing several hymns, all of which illustrate their gospel of love, their yearning spirit, and their social prophecy. Though some of their words sing of another time than ours, our Universalist founders pioneered the questioning mind, the loving and caring spirit, the keen sense of justice and equity that we prize today and have framed in the principles and purposes of our association.
I'll invite Yvonne Moreau forward to light our chalice. And as Yvonne lights our chalice, I'll say words by Hosea Ballou, an early Universalist preacher and leader. If we agree in love, there is no disagreement that can do us any injury. But if we do not, no other agreement can do us any good. Let us endeavor to keep the unity of the Spirit in the bonds of peace. On September 4th, 1793, a group of people who called themselves Universalists gathered in a village in Oxford, Massachusetts for a day of preaching, prayer, fellowship, mutual support, and organizational business. The Reverend John Murray was their moderator, and the only recorded proceedings of that day is a circular letter written by him on behalf of those attending. Although they could not have known it at that time, their meeting marked the beginning of a new denomination that would survive for 168 years until they united with the Unitarians in 1961. John Murray is considered the father of Universalism in North America. Now I'm going to tell you a story that tells you a little bit more about him. It's called The Preacher, the Farmer, and the Little Church That Waited. John Murray was born in England. His family, led by a stern father, rose at dawn each Sunday to spend the whole day praying and attending church. And after church, John's father would quiz him on the sermon. If John couldn't answer every question, his father would strike him with a cane or box his ears. Sunday was a time to sit and think about hell, a place where the Murrays believed that most people went after they died and burned in flames forever and ever. Sounding like a happy childhood, no? John's parents believed in the Calvinist idea of God, that God decided whether a person would go to heaven or hell before that person was even born, and a person could do nothing to change that. Furthermore, only a few people were chosen to go to heaven. The Murrays and others in their church thought that if you attended church a lot and you worked very hard, and if you were very good, and if you made a good living, it could mean that God had chosen you for heaven. That's why John's father was so strict. John tried to please his father. At the age of 6, he could read entire chapters of the Bible. He developed a talent for speaking, and as a teenager, he was often asked to preach at nearby churches. When John was 19, he left for London and got a job at the cloth mill. He was careful, though, to attend church every evening and on Sunday, and he woke every morning at 4 a.m. to pray. He began to think that Maybe he was one of the special few people that God had chosen. He even started to feel and act superior to others. One day in church, John met Eliza, the most beautiful young woman he had ever seen. He immediately fell in love, and she fell in love with him too, and soon after, they married. At the same time in London, a small group of people called Universalists were preaching ideas about God that were very different from the Calvinists. "John," said Eliza one day, "who are the Universalists?" "I don't know," he answered. "I hear they are evil and dangerous people." "Well, what do they believe?" asked Eliza. "Well, from what I hear, it's some crazy idea that, that every person will go to heaven because God is so good," said John. "Well, to tell you the truth," said Eliza, "I sometimes wonder myself why a truly good God would want millions of humans to go to hell. Besides, John, is anyone really completely good?" Oh, John felt uneasy. It seemed wrong to question what he'd been taught his whole life. "Let's find out more," said Eliza. Well, John and Eliza learned about the Universalist ideas about God. They spent several years carefully thinking through their beliefs, and in the end, they chose Universalism. Their friends were shocked and refused to be friends anymore. John and Eliza didn't care. Universalism gave them hope in place of stern judgment. And John discovered that he no longer looked down on people. He now cared deeply about others, rich or poor. He and Eliza made new friends, and to add to their happiness, they had a baby boy. Then everything changed. Their baby died, and Eliza became sick. John spent all their money and borrowed more to save her, but she too died. Then John was thrown into debtor's prison for owing money. "I have come to pay your debts, John, and get you out of this place," said Eliza's brother, who came to John's rescue. John replied, "My baby and my wife are dead. I don't care whether I live or die. Just leave me here." But Eliza's brother brought John home anyway. "Come on, John," said his friends. "Preach Universalism for us. We need you." "I shall never preach again," John said. "But I know what I will do. I'm going to cross the ocean to America, lose myself in the wilderness. I am done with the world." So in 1770, John sailed to America in the Hand and Hand ship. The ship was supposed to dock in New York, but the captain miscalculated, and instead the Hand and Hand got stuck on a sandbar off the coast of New Jersey. The captain asked John to go ashore and see if he could find some fresh food and water for the crew. While John was glad to get off the ship, it had been a long voyage, and after walking some distance through the tall pines, he came to a clearing with a large house and, to his astonishment, a trim-looking church made of rough sawed lumber. A tall farmer stood in front of the house, cleaning fish. "Welcome," the farmer said. "My name's Thomas Potter." "And I'm John Murray from the ship, Hand in Hand." "Yes," said Thomas, "I saw your ship in the bay. Stuck on the sandbar she is." "May I buy your fish to take back to the crew?" asked John. "You can have them for the taking," answered Thomas, "and please come back and spend the night here with me. I'll tell you about this little church and why it's here." John gratefully carried the fish to the sailors and then returned to Thomas's home for the night. "Come, my friend, sit in front of our fire this chilly fall evening," said Thomas. "I'm so glad you have come. You may be the very person I've been waiting for." John wondered, waiting for? What's he talking about? Thomas explained. "You see, I grew up here in these woods. I never had a chance to read or write, but I always liked hearing about the Bible, and I've thought a lot about religion. Trouble is, my ideas are pretty different from the ideas of most of the preachers who travel through these parts. I built this little church myself for preachers who travel to use, and I ask them questions and talk to them. but they don't know what to make of me or my ideas. I keep looking for a preacher of a different stamp, and I want a preacher who will teach about a loving God who saves all people, not just a chosen few. And today, when I saw your ship in the bay, a voice inside me seemed to say, "There, Potter, in that ship is the preacher you've been waiting for." John said quickly, I am not a preacher. "But," said Thomas, leaning forward, "can you say that you've never preached?" "Well, I have preached," answered John, "and I believe as you do in a loving God." I knew it, shouted Thomas. "You're the preacher I've waited for so long. You've got to preach in my church on Sunday." "No," said John, "I never want to preach again. Tomorrow, as soon as the wind changes, I will be on my way." Well, after John went to bed, he couldn't sleep. He thought to himself as he tossed and turned, "I just want to get away from everything. If I preach universalism, I know there's going to be trouble. Folks here in America mostly have Calvinist views, just as in England. Why start trouble for myself in a new country? But Thomas Potter has such faith in me, and he's so kind. Oh, I wish I knew what to do." Well, by Saturday night, the wind still hadn't changed, and John finally agreed to preach the next morning. Thomas Potter was overjoyed. He grabbed his coat and hat and ran for the door. "I'm going to spread the word to all the neighbors. They can expect a sermon like they've never heard before." So, on Sunday morning, September 30th, 1770, Thomas Potter's dream came true, and the first Universalist sermon was delivered in America. At last, he could hear a preacher who talked love instead of punishment. As for John Murray, after that Sunday, he knew he wanted to preach. Just as he expected, there were people who were angry at him for preaching ideas so different, and they spread lies about him and stoned him, but he stuck to his beliefs, and in 1779 organized the first Universalist church in America in Gloucester, Massachusetts. After many years, he fell in love again and married. He and his wife Judith had a daughter, and John Murray stayed in Gloucester. He helped organize Universalism as a religion in the United States in 1793. John's going to come forward to tell us more.
So as you've heard, John Murray became minister of the First Universalist Church in Gloucester, Massachusetts in 1779. Together with that congregation, Murray won 2 landmark victories for religious freedom and the separation of church and state. One of them was the right of congregations to be free of financially supporting the state church, and the right of independent churches to ordain their own clergy and grant them the right to perform marriages. There were other pioneer ministers who preached universalism in the late 1700s along the New England coast. Some of them journeyed as far north as Canada, which was included in the association from the beginning in 1804. Many of the tunes we'll be singing today may be familiar to you. In the 18th and 19th centuries, authors wrote texts in musical meters which fit tunes they knew. Few hymn books published before 1850 contained the tunes, so we seldom know the exact tune that the author had in mind. The hymns in our program today were set mainly to tunes that had already been composed by that date when the text was written and are still familiar today, although we've changed the words frequently over time. So we're going to get you to join us in singing a song called "Go Forth, My Friends." It was written by John Murray in 1792, but the music dated back to 1708.
Jesus says, "Go forth, my friends, go pray."
So the work of the early preachers was arduous. The trials were great, but the harvest of souls heartening. One of these early preachers was Hosea Ballou, whose words we read for the opening. Hosea Ballou was a self-educated farm boy from Vermont who became a forceful and progressive speaker for the Universalist cause. In 1805, he published a treatise of atonement, asserting that God was a loving father rather than a punitive judge, that Jesus was an exalted human being rather than a member of the Trinity, and that sin was personal rather than inherited. He trained generations of ministers and thousands came to hear him. In 1807, the Universalist Convention charged Hosea Ballou and 3 other ministers with writing a book of new hymns that would unite mind and spirit in singing the Universalist gospel. 1 year later, they published the hymnal for 75 cents, leather-bound. It contained 400 original hymns by the 4 editors. Chorealis will now sing one of Hosea Ballou's hymns, foretelling the glories which come to earth when all creation hears and responds to the new truth.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Susan Lynch. The hope was millennial and the spirit contagious. Universalism spread north, south, and west past the Alleghenies, removing the fear of hell and bringing the hope of universal salvation. While Unitarianism spread from city to city, Universalism spread everywhere. Preachers took the gospel on horseback. Where's Rosemary? On horseback to cities, towns, hamlets, and crossroads. The work was spread by Jonathan Kidwell in Ohio and Indiana, George Rogers from Toronto to New Orleans, Alexander Laurie and David Levitt in Ontario, and down through the years to Quillen Shin, Universalism's last great evangelist, who died in 1907 at the age of 62 after a missionary trip to South Carolina. It is reported that from 1904 to 1905 alone, he traveled more than 38,000 miles, 900 of them on horseback or on foot. Russell Miller observed that Shin recruited hundreds of individuals and was responsible for building at least 40 churches and recruiting at least 30 people to the ministry. Traveling preachers at the time were a form of entertainment during the 1800s and early 1900s. The Universalists were known for having studied the Bible and early realized that the Bible was written by many people and that some parts carried more historical weight than others. One example of these traveling preachers was David Levitt. He traveled the far corners of Ontario, challenging Orthodox preachers to debates that could last 2 or 3 days. People loved this religious sport and flocked to hear. On one occasion, Levitt, with his prodigious biblical memory and skill at arguing from proof texts, downed 4 Methodist preachers in a row. We'll sing a particularly poetic hymn written by Alexander Gretton Laurie, a Scotsman who preached in Ontario starting in 1843. He described Universalism as, quote, sprinkled like fleecy clouds on the bosom of a speckled city, unquote.
I love the image of the moon flinging her radiance, especially after the last couple days of that beautiful full moon, if you got a chance to see it. Well, there certainly was not unanimity amongst the early Universalists. Universalists were not of one mind yesterday any more than they are today. So the independence that brought Universalists out of orthodoxy, no matter how evil, resulted in a variety of beliefs. Death and Glory Universalists, that was actually a name of a group, held that everyone went immediately to heaven after death. Restorationists believed that a God of justice would mete out some purgatorial punishment before final restoration of all souls with the divine. One of these controversies was aired very publicly. Thomas Whitmore, the Universalist minister who edited and published the Universalist Trumpet, became very influential in shaping Universalist thought. He preached the simple gospel of God's unfailing love for all persons in all times, places, and conditions. As we take our offering today, Chorealis will sing one of Whitmore's hymns. Unlike most hymns that we're hearing today, the composer wrote both the words and the music, and the song was first published in 1842. Picture a big revivalist meeting in some small frontier town as the setting for this rendition of the Resurrection Hymn by Thomas Whitmore. And I invite our ushers to take the collection as we sing. Feel like ending that with huzzah! We also, as we take collection, offer one half of our unidentified contribution to an outside organization each month. And for October, we're offering that to Child Haven. Child Haven does amazing work in providing orphanages, but really more than that, real wraparound care and love for children coming from families who either have lost the parents or whose parents can't afford to house them and keep them any longer. They also offer micro-business loans and training for women and provide just a beautiful model to the communities of how life could be. So as we accept this offering, please join us in singing From You I Receive. Thank you for your generosity. Thomas Whitmore, that wrote the last hymn we just sang, butted heads with a man named Abner Neeland, who was the most radical of Universalist ministers and ultimately left the Universalist fold. Neeland disdained societal mores, preferring naturalistic and personal quests for truth. In 1831, after several stormy ministries, he went to Boston and founded the first society of free inquirers and a newspaper called the Boston Investigator. Whitmore challenged Neeland to a newspaper debate. That was something that actually went on in those days. Neeland declared that the Universalist belief in God was a chimera of imagination, that the Universalist belief in Jesus, nothing more than myth and fable, and that Universalist faith in eternal life was false. Neeland ended up being arrested and put in jail for 60 days for blasphemy. And he was convicted after 4 trials. He spent 60 days in prison and when released, left for Iowa, where he founded a small utopian community named Salubria. Today, we would not find his ideas shocking. He believed in equal treatment for all people, both under the law as well as by society, and supported such controversial ideas as divorce rights for women, married women keeping their own names and property, refused to condemn interracial marriages, and was in favor of birth control. So pretty ahead of his time. Now, I think part of the reason his ideas may not have been so readily accepted was perhaps his presentation. And so we're going to sing one of his hard-hitting hymns that will give you an idea of his tone. Have a listen. Yeah, I think anytime you start a hymn with calling people ancient bigots, you perhaps do not win their favor. We're going to shift a little bit now from that to talking about early childhood education and religious education for children, and Audrey's going to share some story with us.
Educators take note. The education of children was an early concern. In 1787, Shippy Townsend wrote a catechism for Universalist children. Soon, Sunday schools were started in several communities. They took religious education seriously. The post of Sunday school superintendent was an honored as well as demanding one. It was frequently filled by the most prominent laymen in the congregation. In the second quarter of the 19th century, Universalists strongly supported the transition from private to public schools that were tax-supported. They strongly supported the separation of church and state, and therefore worked to keep public schools non-sectarian, where no religious instruction would be permitted. Keep these thoughts in mind as you sing a hymn about Sunday school, written by John Greenleaf Adams as part of the Sabbath School Melodist, a collection of hymns and tunes designed for the Sabbath school and the home, published in 1866. Please rise as we sing this song.
As we enter into a time of meditation, I offer you these words by Reverend Richard Trudeau. God is love. This quotation from the New Testament has been dear to many sects, but perhaps none more than the Universalists. 200 years ago, considering it to be biblical proof that their own understanding of God was correct, Universalists adopted it as their principal motto. In their very first declaration of faith in 1790, they gave it prominent place. In their homes, they stitched it into samplers. In their churches, they painted it on pulpits and carved it into chancel tables. They put it on mastheads of newspaper and the covers of their orders of service. Though Universalists view the Bible and even God changed over the years, their conviction that God is love remained constant. They reaffirmed this commitment in their last declaration of faith in 1953. But in a time when so many are unable to share the faith of their ancestors, when God is less real than God seems to have been in the past, when for many the word God itself is no more than a question mark, a name of life's mystery, in such a time one can't help but wonder, can this vestige of an earlier age still be of use? We say that it can. God is love is advice for a journey. It shines light on our choice of religious path. This venerable motto says to each of us, the experience of love can be relied on as a sign that you are headed in the right direction. It says if the religious path you are following fosters loving relationship, then your path is the right one. The choir will now sing a hymn, One Sweetly Solemn Thought, written by Phoebe Carey in 1852. And as we do so, I invite those who are online, if you have a thought, a prayer, a wish, a joy, concern, a celebration, a challenge, I invite you to write that in the chat on your computer. For those of you here in the sanctuary, we have 2 candle stations set up. If you wish to light a candle this morning, I invite you to come forward now. Universalist women were among the most ardent and prolific hymn writers. The Carey sisters and Phoebe Hereford represented a numerous clan. The Carey sisters' literary soirees in their New York apartment drew some of the most famous authors and political figures of their time. They gathered too the unknown, especially women who were guided and encouraged. Let's hear a hymn written by Alice Carey, published in Services for the Congregational Worship in 1877. My mouth is full of whispering song. Another literary universalist was Phoebe Hereford, poet, lecturer, and author of 24 books. She wrote in her midlife, "All my books have been prepared among pressing duties of a domestic, editorial, and pastoral character, but God called me to preach, and preach she did." All of these Universalist women did, not only about universalism, but women's rights and hopes for children. These women forged the trails of life in poems, songs, and hymns that move the hearts of all men and women alike. "Cast Thy Bread Upon the Water" is a hymn by Phoebe Hereford, written in 1852. I'll invite Lynn forward now.
Good morning. I'm Lynn Turvey. These early Universalists were working not only for a literal bounteous harvest, but a bounteous harvest in terms of social reform. As early as 1790, the Philadelphia Convention of Universalists addressed the social issues of its day, just as we do in our national conference today. They passed pioneering resolutions opposing war, slavery, and compulsory oath-taking, and affirmed arbitration in place of litigation. On the issue of slavery, they reasoned that since people would all be equal in heaven, they had best practiced getting along as equals on earth. Other Universalists were working for women's rights, prison reform, the rehabilitation of prisoners, the abolition of capital punishment, and temperance. Just as it is today, they found music could be a powerful part of their campaigns. An example from the temperance movement is the hymn, "Touch Not Thy Cup."
Oh, you're continuing.
Another expression of reform was the formation of utopian communities. In 1842, one of the first and most successful, Hopedale community, was founded by Hosea Ballou, a distant cousin of Hosea Ballou. When he became a Universalist, he decided that if God's love was universal and Jesus' life was a model for all time, then he must be a temperance advocate, a pacifist, a women's rights champion, a supporter of labor, and, as he called it, a practical Christian socialist. His writing on the idea of peaceful non-resistance influenced Leo Tolstoy, and through him, Mahatma Gandhi and Martin Luther King Jr. Please rise and join us in singing his great and enduring peace hymn, "Years Are Coming."
Universalism was the friend of women and was greatly gifted and carried forth by women. Their names are legion. Judith Sargent Murray was the wife of John Murray and a well-regarded author, essayist, and playwright. Clara Barton was the founder of the American Red Cross. Olympia Brown was the first woman to be ordained in America and an ardent suffragette. She would be amazed and proud of the large number of women in our ministry today. Frances Dana Gage effectively championed the triune cause: abolition, women's rights, and temperance. In 1850, she petitioned the Iowa State Legislature to remove 2 words of power and privilege from the Constitution. The words were white and male. In 1852, Gage wrote a poem later made into a song, 100 years hence. Note how many social justice issues Gage cited that are still with us today. You can judge for yourself what progress we have made in the almost 100 years since Gage wrote her poem. Sing this together. This morning, we have shared in song and story the legacy of universalism brought to our denomination. Today, and for an infinity of tomorrows, we need a love for all humanity and the call to serve that humanity. Today, and for an infinity of tomorrows, we need a vision of one world united by its common humanity, where all respect the diversity of human practice. There is indeed much to sing and shout about as we commemorate our Universalist heritage. Let us use John Murray's famous charge as our closing words. Go out into the highways and byways, give the people something of your new vision. You may possess a small light, but uncover it. Let it shine. Use it in order to bring more light and understanding to the hearts and minds of men and women. Give them not hell, but hope and courage. Preach the kindness of everlasting love of God. I invite Yvonne to extinguish our chalice. Other one. The Universalists were great preachers, but poor prophets. Our last hymn was written by Mary Colburn, Universalists in the North, were early and ardent opponents of slavery. One of the differences between Unitarian and Universalist positions on slavery is that some of the Northern Unitarians were merchants and ship owners who were making a great deal of money tied to cotton produce in the South and kept alive through the intention of slavery, whereas Universalists had no such conflicts. The Unitarians might have had formal and elegant petitions, but Universalists marched. They spoke, argued, and participated with Quakers and others in the underground railway to safe haven in Canada. Chorealis will close our service by celebrating the early Universalists' optimism and commitment by singing Freedom Advancing. It is our tradition as we close our service to join in our closing song, Carry the Flame of Peace and Love, and invite you to rise as you are willing and able, and if you wish to join hands as we sing, Carry the Flame.